Good evening, people. Today we're going to be looking at one of my very favorite deck profiles in Card 5 Vanguard, especially in the premium format. Now, the deck profile that we're going to be talking about is going to be a Majesty Lord Blaster and Sing Saver Dragon build. Yes, I said Sing Saver and not Thing Saver because Thing Saver sounds kind of wonky, and I don't like how it sounds. Sing Saver sounds kind of nicer, you know? Alright, so we're going to start off with a few things. First, in this deck profile, I'm going to talk about the Great Force a little bit later, because the Great Force might take a little while. We're going to do something a little bit simpler first. Alright, we're going to start with the Great Zeros. Now, the first thing we're going to start off with is our best support doggo, especially for any blaster deck. One of the best doggos ever. Alright, so this is Wingull Brave. This is the G version. If you guys don't know about it, there is a G and a V version, but we're going to talk about the G version first. Now, the G version is a Forerunner. If you guys don't know what a Forerunner is, basically it is a starting Vanguard where you write something on top of it, and this thing gets to move out of the soul to another empty rearguard circle. That's what a Forerunner is. Okay? Now, the only reason you'd actually want to run Wingull Brave in this deck is to search for other blaster units. Now, how his skill works is that if you boosted a blaster unit, and if the attack hits, yes, it doesn't specify what the attack hits. It doesn't have to only hit a Vanguard, it can also hit rear guards. So if this unit boosts and it attacks, and if the attack lands or hits, you can move Wingull Brave into your soul, search your deck for a blaster unit. It can be any blaster unit, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. If you have Exculpate, you can also search for Exculpate the Blaster. Alright? So, you can move this unit into your soul and search for any blaster unit from your deck. Any. Yes, any. The only reason you would want to run him is because of that. Now, moving on to the other grade zeros. Now, I am running 8 crits. Where are my 8 crits? Alright. I am running 8 crits. Primarily, we are running the Draco Kit. Why? Because he's a strike fodder. He can be used as a shield, and he can also be used as a strike fodder. Also, the 15k shield's kind of like a bonus, if you think about it. Next, we are running 4 Floral Paladin Flogels, because Flogel is the most important unit in any blaster deck. Now, if you're not very familiar with what Flogel does, Flogel's effect is if you make Counterblast 1, okay, you make Counterblast 1, choose a blaster blade that has already attacked, and restand it, but of course you would need to make sure that Flogel goes back to the deck. Alright? So basically the skill is you Counterblast 1, put this unit back to your deck, shuffle it, choose a rested blaster blade that has attacked, and restand it. So you are able to do a lot of multi-attacks with Flogel, and it's usually kind of fun, especially when you have a lot of Counterblast open. And if you have, let's say, 2 on the field, you can use 2 of them to restand your blaster blade, and you get to do many multi-attacks that your opponent might not be able to guard with, especially in the later game. So that is the 4 Flogels. Next, we are running the new Heal Guardians. If you don't know what the Heal Guardian is, it came in the clan selection in the D series. Alright, now this one, just remember that all Heal Guardians have the same effects. As long as neither you nor your opponent are at grade 3, you get to run these effects. Now, one of these effects would be, until the end of the turn, you plus 10k power permanently. Until the end of the turn, you plus 10k power. That means if your Vanguard is at 8k, and if you throw this down, your Vanguard becomes 18k until the end of the turn. Or you get to choose the other effect, which is when your opponent attacks, you get to choose one of their units, and that unit minuses 2 crit. So if, let's say, your opponent has a unit that is swinging for 1 damage, and you play this card, that unit no longer swings for damage. But do remember that even if you don't take damage, the attack still hits. Alright, the attack will still hit. And the other effect, if you guys aren't too familiar, if you call this to a rearguard circle and you have no damage in your damage zone, you take 1 damage. Alright, it's basically a damage eater, but you don't get to refund that damage back. Alright, this is one of the best cards that came out of the clan selection. All right. Next, I am also running one Perfect Guard and two Margles because draw triggers in a deck is usually kind of useful. Also, you would only put two of these because, well, you can either use it as just a normal guard or fodder for your Perfect Guards. And of course, no premium deck would be complete without the Overtrigger. Now, the Overtrigger, this one is from Keter Sanctuary, but you can put this in any clan that is technically yellow. Anything that is from the United Sanctuary or belongs in Keter Sanctuary gets to play with this Overtrigger. Now, there is a caveat to playing this Overtrigger. If you play this Overtrigger, you are not allowed to play Ultima. If you play Ultima, you cannot play the Overtrigger. And if people aren't very aware of what the Overtrigger does, basically, if you drive check this, you choose a unit, it gains plus 100 million power, and then additionally, your front row rear guards get to drive check. So if you have a grade 3 in your front row, your grade 3s get to do a twin drive. And that is all for the grade 0s. Simple enough. Next, we're moving on to the grade 1s. Alright, for grade 1s, mine is a little bit sporadic, but I run two Blaster Daggers, mainly because of the Blaster name, and also if a Blaster Vanguard or an Alfred Vanguard hits, you get to bounce this back from the rearguard circle back to your hand. That's one of the few main reasons why I play this, but the real reason I play it is because it's a blaster. There could be other blasters that you could use, but I like this because it gives 8k. Next, we are running three of the new Perfect Guards. Now, this Perfect Guard, I would say, is a little bit better because of its actual new effect. Now, its other effect, especially in a Royal Paladin deck that you can play, or especially if you're running a blaster base, is that when you have only 2 or less cards in your hand, and if you guard with this, you don't have to pay the cost. And normally all your Perfect Guards have the cost of needing you to drop a card from your hand. So if you only have 2 cards in your hand, so let's say this is the only 2 cards you have left in your hand, you can play this in the Guardian Circle, and you don't need to pay the cost. Now this Perfect Guard also works with the interaction with where is my buddy? With Maron here. Alright, now Maron's skill is that when you Soul Blast one, and if your Vanguard's a Blaster or an Alfred, you get to search your deck for a grade 2 or below unit and call it to the Guardian Circle. And in this case here, if you call the Perfect Guard, and if your hand is at 2, and if your hand is at 1, you get to play this for free. So technically speaking, this is a free Perfect Guard. Alright? I can even hear my grandmother laughing at me. Alright, next. We run three Wingal Braves. This is the one from the V series. And if you guys don't know, this gives you almost unlimited pluses if your opponent lets you hit. So what is the effect? Now, on Vanguard or Rearguard, if this unit attack hits or boost and the attack hits a Vanguard, you may search the top 7 cards of your deck and add a blaster to your hand, and that is it. After you do that, you shuffle your deck. So why I say this gives you infinite pluses, because I'm not really too sure if the term infinite pluses is correct, but it usually gives you a +1. So if you really want to mess with your opponent, so let's say you have 2 Wingulls. Okay, so if you boost and you attack, and if this Wingull hits, you get to search off both of them. It's not just one, it's both. Alright? So you may +2, you may +1, or you may +0. So yeah, it's not an infinite plus, my bad. And next, for obvious reasons, if you play a Blaster deck, you run 4 Blaster Friend Particles. So if you guys don't know what his effect is that when you call a Blaster Blade, the original one, the original Blaster Blade in name, and you call it in front of Bartgull or the back, as long as you're in the same column, and if your Vanguard's a Blaster, you get to countercharge 1, which is very important in almost any Blaster deck that you run. Alright. Next, that's all for the great ones. If you guys don't know, I'm playing, I think, 7... I'm only playing 12 great ones, which is usually enough for me, usually. Next, we move on to the great 2s. The great 2s are quite self-explanatory. Of course, in any blaster deck, you would want to run 4 blaster blades. Alright? Now, you would usually never run any of his effects, unless you were very desperate. Now, the very first effect is that as long as you have 4 rear guards, Blaster Blade will +1 crit. That means he will swing for 2 damage instead of 1. The other effect is, on V or on rear, when you call him, or when you ride him, you may counterblast 1, soul blast 1, and retire one of your opponent's front row units. And that's it. His effects are that simple, and he's that great. Also, he combos very well with Flogel, if you have her in your hand or on your field. Next, the star of the show, for me at least, is 4 pieces of the new Blaster Blade Seeker. Now, if you don't know what this card does, it's very simply put. Its very first effect is if you ride this unit on Vanguard or Rearguard, and if your Vanguard is the same grade or lower, you get to discard a card from your hand, you get to retire one of your opponent's front row Rearguards, and if your Vanguard is a Seeker, that unit's crit becomes 2. Not +1, it becomes 2. So there's a difference. Alright? So if, let's say, I was currently on Blaster Blade and my opponent was also a grade 2, I could discard a card. I can retire one of his rear guards, and my Blaster Blade becomes +1. My Blaster Blade's crit becomes 2 instead of 1. However, if he is a grade 1, I cannot use this effect. Alright, the grade has to be either higher, it has to be the same, or lower. Alright, and his other effect, which I feel is kind of the cherry on top, is that his second effect is if this unit, at the end of this battle, when this unit attacks, if you did not write this turn, you can put him back to the bottom of your deck, and you get to draw 1. This is where most of the multi-attacks that I do allows me to gain back a lot of cards in my hand. It allows me to draw a lot, basically. Next, as a Majesty Lord Blaster deck, it is very important that you would run at least 3 Blaster Darks. I run 3 because, well, it's Blaster Dark. I don't oftentimes write into him, but if I get him, I will write into him. Which is kind of good. Of course, if you guys don't know his effect, is that when it is ridden, or when you call it, you can counterblast 1. Your opponent chooses 1 of their rear guards, and they retire it. It can be from the front row, it can be at the back row. It's totally up to them. The other effect is, if you get to run this properly, is that when your opponent has no rear guards, you get to drop a card from your hand, and this unit +1 drive, which is usually kind of good. It can also cheese a lot of things. And the most important support unit in this deck, for me, is running 3 Levarots. If you guys don't know what Levarot's skill is, it's very simple. So when you ride him, when he comes down onto the Vanguard Circle or the Rearguard Circle, you get to counterblast 1 and call a grade 2 from your deck to an empty Rearguard Circle. It has to be empty. However, if you don't have the counterblast to pay for him, you can actually pay it with a Soul Blast, which is beautifully done. And that is all my grade 2s, basically. So I'm gonna show you what I meant by the combo plays in a bit. I'll reference it a little bit later. But we'll have to move on first, and what better way to start off than to introduce the main driving force of this deck, which is Majesty Lord Blaster. I only run 3, because like I said, in a Blaster deck, it's usually searchable. You can usually search this up into your hand, or sometimes can even get this in your starting hand. Normally, if you see this in your starting hand, you are probably secure to continue doing the plays. So, what does Majesty Lord Blaster do? His skill is simple. The very first one is, as long as you have Blaster Blade and Dart in your soul, if he's on the Vanguard Circle, his power will permanently plus 5k. That means he becomes an 18k base. He also gains an extra crit. And if he is on the Vanguard Circle, every time he attacks, he does a triple drive instead of a twin drive. Alright? So if you put him onto the Rearguard Circle, he still gains the +1 crit. No power, no drive, just the 1 crit. So it's like a free 13k with 2 crits if you put it on the rearguard circle. And the other effect, which is kind of the key to doing anything, is that when this unit attacks, you get to put 2 rearguards into your soul, and you gain 2 force markers. And normally in this deck, you would want to run force 1s. You don't run force 2s, and I have to specify this, you do not run force 2s because force 2s don't stack. Alright? So that is the grade 3. Next, I run the original Sing Saver Dragon. Not Thing Saver, Sing Saver, because I feel Sing Saver has a nicer ring to it. Alright, now, the original Sing Saver has a few skills. The very last one here is that when you attack a Vanguard, you plus 2k. That means it becomes a 13k beater. The first one is a Legion effect, and if there are people here who don't know what Legion is a mechanic that was introduced way back in the day, where if you are the same grade as your opponent, you get to choose 4 cards from your drop zone, put them back to your deck, search your deck for a mate, and put them together. So it will look something like this. Just imagine that this is the mate, and they technically line up to look something like this. Alright, so the original Sing Saver's effect is this. You have to pay 2 Counterblast, Soul Blast 3, and drop 2 cards from your hand. And if you do that, and when this unit is in Legion, after this unit attacks, you get to pay the cost, search your deck for another Sing Saver, ride it as stand, and choose a Blaster Blade Seeker from your soul and re-Legion it again. That means you get to do it like this once again. Alright, I'll show you guys the play in a little bit. Alright? So that's what it usually does. Next, we run the new Sing Saver Dragons. If you don't know what he does, his effect is kind of simple, to be honest. Almost cost-free. I say almost because there are some costs that you're going to need to pay. So, his very first skill is that when this unit comes down to the Vanguard circle, you get to Counterblast 1, search your deck for a Blaster Blade Seeker, and call it to a rearguard circle. It doesn't have to be empty, it just calls to a rearguard circle. And when you do that, that Blaster Blade Seeker gains plus 10k for each force marker that you have on the field. Not just on the Vanguard, on the field. So if you have 3 force markers on the field, that Blaster Blade Seeker gets plus 30k. Alright? Now, the key thing about this new Sing Saver is its skill right here. So when this unit finishes battling another unit, mainly a Vanguard, when it finishes battling a Vanguard, and if you did not write, yes, the keyword here is did not write this turn, you get the Soul Blast 3, choose 4 cards from your drop zone, put them back to the deck, shuffle, search up another Sing Saver, and rewrite it on top, which would allow you to proc the first skill again. Now, however, when you're playing this deck, it would be better for you to not write the V, Sing Saver Dragon, first, because you are never going to be able to proc the second skill, which is kind of sad. Feels like a nerf to Sing Saver, but I could be wrong. Alright? So normally what you want to do, if you have enough damage, is that you would ride on top of Sing Saver, you would Legion after you finish battling, and if you still have enough cost, you would search your deck for another one of this Sing Savers, you would ride it, swing again, pay the cost, stand it, and ride into the new one. Why ride into the new one? Because the new one gives you a force marker, and if you still have enough cost, only if you do, you get to call another Blaster Blade Seeker, and that Blaster Blade Seeker is going to give you an extra crit. It's going to give you extra kill pressure, because that Blaster Blade is going to gain a lot of power from all of the force markers. Alright, normally that's what you would do, but I would show you the play in a bit. Alright, so that's all for the grade 3s. Next, we go into the grade 4s. So we're going to start off simple. I run 3 Marons, because he's a very generic Blaster G Guardian. He works with almost any Blaster deck. Now, if you don't know, I think I kind of explained this just now, is that its skill is when it appears to the Guardian Circle. Okay, so when it appears into the Guardian Circle, you get to Soul Blast 1, search your deck for a grade 2 or lower unit, and call it to the Guardian Circle. And if you do, a his shield plus 5k. So normally I would only use this to search out a perfect guard so that I could hopefully live a turn. Hopefully. I'm thinking of putting this down to 2 and probably playing the Brave G Guardian that acts as a perfect guard as well, because that one can be a little bit handy every once in a while, because you'd never know how many times you would be adding your perfect guards from your deck to your hand, because that can happen. Next we run 2 of this, 2 of the doggos. Now his effect is a GB1 effect. When you put him down, GB1, you need to flip up another G Guardian, and if you have a grade 2 in your front row, as long as you have a grade 2, his shield plus 10k. He's the generic, I'm going to let you flip up a lot of G-Zone G Guardian, technically speaking. He's kind of useful, I guess, every once in a while, but running 2 is usually kind of good, because this helps you do a lot of plays later in the game. Alright, that's for the G Guardians. Next, we are going to be running 1 of the Progenitor Dragons. He is only in my G Zone as a just in case only, because I would rarely go into him and I would usually have enough to pay to Stride. Now, his effect is actually kind of simple. As long as he's open up in the G Zone, you get to Stride for free. That's all. That's all he does. His other effect is when he comes down, you may pay 1 Counterblast, you may pay 1 Soul Blast, call as many cards from your hand to the rearguard circle. Yes, you are forced to call as many. So if you have 5 open rearguard circles, you are forced to call everything from your hand until it fills up the entire board. Which is kind of sad because it forces you to. And if you do that, you get to draw 3 cards. So I guess the better play is to make sure that you don't have an empty field and only put him down, only if you can. The only way you guys are ever going to be striding him is if you have a card with the same name as your Vanguard. So if, let's say, you have a Majesty Lord Blaster as your Vanguard, you drop the Majesty Lord Blaster just to stride him. Alright, next, I only run a set of the Alfreds. Now, Alfred's GB2 skill is basically this. You may Counterblast 1, drop a card from your hand, and then turn himself face up from your G-Zone. And then you choose a Blaster Blade, a card with Blaster Blade in its name. It gets plus 3k power, and it gains Twin Drive. So that means your rearguard Blaster Blade is going to be able to drive check. And that's all it does. And it's actually kind of good, but you would rarely ever go into him because the game wouldn't usually last that long. Next, I only run 2 Crystal Luster Dragons. Now, if you guys don't know, Crystal Luster Dragon is a very good card to set up with and as a finisher. His skill is this. It is an activated skill, so flip a card in your G-Zone face up. Crystal Luster then gains all the skills from your heart. So for example, if you have a Sing Saver as your Vanguard and you stride onto Crystal Luster then becomes Sing Saver himself. Yes, that means you get to perform a Sick Mate, and you get to perform all of the skills from the heart. That is one of the few plays that you get to do. And also, one of the effects that makes him such a good finisher is his GB3, where if you have 2 or more grade 2 or above units, your opponent has to call 3 cards to the Guardian Circle in order for them to guard. So if, for example, you swing with Crystal Luster, and your opponent drops a Perfect Guard, he will still need to drop an additional 2 more cards if he does not want the attack to hit. In other words, Crystal Luster, much like Chain Ranker, wastes a lot of your opponent's resources, especially from the hand. That's 2. Next, I would run 3 gun slots for the very simple reason so that Crystal Luster can flip him up. You would normally not go into gun slot unless you were forced to, but with the introduction of Crystal Luster, you don't really need to go into Gunslot anymore. But his effects are, the very first one, when this unit attacks, and if you have a Blaster or an Alfred as your heart, you get to countercharge 1. And if you have a G-Zone face up, he gains an extra crit. So basically, when he swings, this unit can actually perform a quad drive for free, as long as your heart is a Blaster or an Alfred. Alright? But the most important effect is this. When he's face up in the G-Zone during your turn, that means it's during your turn and your turn only, all Blaster Blades in their card names gain resist. That means if people want to Denial Griffin one of your attacking Blaster Blades, they can't do that because it gains resist. Alright? That is one of the few reasons why you would run Gunslot. And my last one here is this. I run 3. Alright? I run 3 Twin Swords. Because Twin Swords, to me, feels more of an extender and can also sometimes be a finisher. So his effect is this. When this unit is being boosted and it attacks, you may counterblast 1. You may choose a card in your G-Zone and flip it face up. Alright? You get to call from your deck 2 Grade 2 units. 2 Grade 2 units to separate rearguard circles and shuffle your deck. The other effect is what makes this card so beautiful. This effect allows the called units to plus 5k. So for example, if let's say I have 4 cards open in my G-Zone, the called units from deck this turn all gain 20k. So it doesn't have to necessarily only be called by him. If any other rearguard is called by another rearguard effect or vanguard effect, those units also gain the power. He is one of my favorite cards. Alright, so let's start with this. This is play number 1. Let's say your opponent strides first. Alright? And if you choose not to guard, you might have quite a number of damage here. So let's just put some damage here. So let's say we have 2. Let's say we've got 2 damage right here. Alright? And your Vanguard is currently at 18k. And this is you striding first. Of course, normally the first players never get to stride first, which is kind of sad, to be honest. And let's say you have this as your hand. Alright? So what you want to do is you stride. Ooh. Oops. Alright. So you would stride. For me, I wouldn't... If I already have Blaster Blade and Blaster Dart in my soul, I would usually never go for Crystal Luster. What I would do normally is that I would set up my board like this. I would go into Twin Sword, alright, call a booster, and from here, if my hand is this stacked, if and only if is that stacked, I would call both Blaster Blade Seekers onto the rearguard circles. So why am I doing this? So let's say, because normally when I play this, especially on CFA, when I play this in Cardfight Arena, I would normally distribute my force markers towards the entire front row. So that means there will be a force marker here, a force marker here, and a force marker here. So both sides will at least guarantee me that I could at least swing into my opponent. Alright? So what I would normally do first is I would swing here. Okay? And if the attack doesn't hit, and since I didn't write this turn, I get to go back to my deck, and then I draw 1. Alright? So your starting hand is 0. If you called everything, your starting hand is going to be 0. And then you do the same thing here, which will swing for 20 again. After this attack finishes swinging, go back to your deck, you draw 1 more. You're currently at 2. You don't technically plus, there are plus minuses every once in a while. So you were able to draw 2 cards. Alright? So here's where the magic happens. You are going to plus your hand significantly. So here what you're going to do is you're going to boost, you're going to attack, you pay 1 counter blast, you flip a G-Zone face up. Normally you would flip up Gunslot. From your deck, you call 2 more Blaster Blade Seekers. Shuffle your deck. Alright, shuffle your deck. And because you have a G-Zone face up, right? these two Blaster Blade Seekers are going to plus 5k. So they're going to swing at 25. So you perform a triple check, depending if they block your attack. That's unfortunate, but what can you do, right? So when you swing, you do a triple drive. First check, second check, it's a crit. So it depends on where you want to give it. Maybe you could give it to your left. And then your third check, you get nothing. That's fine. So that's a plus 5. So from 0 hand, you now have 5. And since you still have attacks left, here we'll swing for 25. And since you didn't write this turn, you go back to your deck. You go back to your deck. You draw 1. And you attack again. And then once the attack finishes, it goes back to the deck. And you draw 1 more. So we started our hand with 4. We're now at plus 3. You see this? You're at plus 3. So this is one of the plays I usually do to try to get my hand back, so that I can at least guard or at least try to survive the next following few turns. This is play number 1. Moving on to play number 2. Alright, now we move on to play number 2. So this is most likely an unlikely scenario, so just in case if you guys didn't know, let's say you had already flipped a... let's say you've already had a G Guardian face up. Alright, and this is your first stride. This is where a lot of things can happen. Now, normally what the play here would be is, if you take a look here, there is some damage. And let's just say you have 2 rear guards that are still up. Let's just say. Alright, let's just say that there is still a rear guard somewhere. Hopefully not, because that would be kind of tragic. Okay, so let's just say that you had 2 units still on the board. Alright, so the calculations are going to be a bit wonky. So let's say you draw for turn. Alright, and you ride Sing Saver. So at the moment, you have 6 soul. You have 6 souls in you at the moment. So you ride Sing Saver. What you can do is this. You stride, and you go into Crystal Luster. This is one of the few times only where I would actually go into Crystal Luster. So you perform Crystal Luster's skill. You flip a G-Zone face up. Alright? You flip a G-Zone face up. Crystal Luster is now Sing Saver Dragon. Alright? So from here, what you can do is from your drop zone. Alright, you choose 3 cards, you choose 4 cards, and you put them back to your deck. And you search out a Blaster Blade Seeker, and you Legion them together. So, here's what I meant by wonky. Alright, so here's what I meant by a little bit wonky. So, calculations for Legion, especially if you have a force marker on you, usually works like this. What people usually don't know is that when you stride Crystal Luster and you perform a Legion, the power you get from one force marker applies to both the mate and the vanguard. So at the moment the vanguard is at 26 and your mate gives you an extra 10, right? So how much power do they get in total? So the very quick answer would be 58 if I'm not mistaken. Okay, because you still get the plus 2k when you're attacking a vanguard. 58. So how do you calculate it? So just calculate like this, all right? So we'll take this away first. So 10 plus 11 is 21. 21 plus 10, again from a force marker. From a force marker, it becomes 20. So it becomes 20, and then you plus another 10. So in the total here, it would swing for 42. And when your Crystal Luster is on the Vanguard Circle, it becomes 56. And when Crystal Luster swings, it becomes 58. And if, let's say, you have GB3 open, you count the amount of units, grade 2 or above units, including your mate. So it goes 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that means you would have 4 units that are grade 2 and above. Alright? So normally what the play would be is that what I would normally do would look something like this. Okay. It's gonna be a bit wonky, so bear with me. So a rear guard would swing. Your opponent would have to guard with 3 cards. Then your rear guard will swing, depending on the matchup. Your rear guard will swing again. He'll have to drop 3 cards. So this is where things become even worse. You swing here. Alright? You swing with your Vanguard. And then if he decides to guard it, you perform a triple check. First one, second one, and third one. And since it's a draw trigger, you draw an extra. Now, this is one of the unfortunate scenarios because if you drive check one of these Sing Savers, you cannot go back into this one. However, you can still perform the skill. You Counterblast 2. You Counterblast 2. You Soul Blast 3. 1. Maybe 2 and 3. You search your deck for another Sing Saver. And in this case, right now, you would go into the V1. Because the other G1 just decided to pop into your hand. Of course, you have to make sure you drop 3 cards. Was it 3? Or was it 2? Yeah, you drop 2. So let's say we drop Mark Gull and we drop Master Blade. Alright? So, in this case here, when your Vanguard swings, it's going to be even bigger. Because you gain an extra force marker. And from here, you can still use Sing Saver's skill. You can Counterblast 1. And if you're wondering why I'm legioning with 2 units that don't have the legion marker, believe it or not, I asked Bushiroad officially, and they said that I am forced to legion with the new ones. I am forced to legion into the new ones. Yes. So, you would play the Counterblast, you would call another. So you would call another Blaster Blade Seeker anywhere that you want. Call it out. And this Blaster Blade Seeker can perform one of the other skills, which is to drop 1. To drop 1. And then what you would do is that you would retire one of your opponent's front row rear guards, and then this Vanguard here pluses an extra crit. So this Vanguard is going to swing even bigger. How do you calculate it? It's 10 plus 20. It's 10 plus 13, which is 23. 23, and then you plus 2 more extra force markers if you put it in onto your Vanguard. So it's going to swing for 63. Yes, 63. So here you would swing for 63, but this time you don't gain the GB3 because Crystal Luster is no longer here. So you perform a twin drive, first check, crit, all to the rear guard, and then last one, nothing. So this will swing for huge numbers, which I'm totally lazy to think. Alright, so that is normally how I would normally play the deck. But I would only use this combo as a finisher if I get one of the Sing Savers into my hand. Normally it would be this one. If I don't get this one, I don't perform it. And that is all for this lengthy lecture, I guess. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye!